Begging us for that lovely rendition of Havdalah. We are tonight here with Shlomo Levin from South Hampstead Synagogue, who we're going to have a conversation together about life after COVID. But Rav Levin, we all know very well, has done amazing things with his synagogue, kind of fell into it all those years ago, from what I remember, and has done really wonderful programming before and during lockdown. And our challenge tonight, Shlomo, is to discuss Judaism beyond lockdown. And if it's going to radically change, is this just is it going to just a blip and we'll go back to what we were before? Or is there a permanent change of where our Judaism and Anglo-Jewry is going to go over the next few years? What do you think?
Well, let me start by relating a story that was told to me by my son who lives in Melbourne, Australia. Apart from being a lawyer, he's also the chazan of a large centrist Orthodox shul. And a couple of weeks ago now, there was a bar mitzvah which was planned for Shabbat morning, a large bar mitzvah. It's the kind of shul where many, many people turn up for bar mitzvahs, similar to the way in which we run our large shuls over here. And on Thursday night, the government, the local government, Victoria, announced that there was going to be a lockdown which was going to start at midnight on Friday night. So the bar mitzvah was hastily rescheduled to take place on Friday night instead of Shabbat morning. And about 300 people piled into this large synagogue. The bar mitzvah boy read part of his portion, was shkalim. And then everybody went into the hall and had a slap-up kiddush without any social distancing whatsoever, without masks, just the way it was in the good old days, and stuck their hands into the food and ate with great pleasure, and then all went home and started lockdown. So my son's conclusion from all of that was that absolutely nothing is going to change as a result of lockdown. We'll very soon go back to default position and will behave in exactly the way that we did before. That was his conclusion. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with it. Right. I mean, I hope it won't be that way.
Well, was this particularly religious shul? Because it's also important in terms of which groups within Orthodoxy. So was this a particular...
No, this is centrist Orthodox. It's just like our shuls.
Centrist. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. People who are compliant.
Okay. So why do you think things are going to change?
Well, I don't know they're going to change, but I'd like to think that they will change. Because I think that if we've been through this past year and have not learned anything from it, then there's something wrong with our receptors. Because everything which we experience should change us in some way or another. And so the question for us should not be, are we going to change? And I really don't know what our shores are going to look like. I don't know if we'll ever go back to shaking hands and to hugging and to kiddushes in the usual way. But I think our question, Rafi, should really be not are we going to change, but how we should change. What should be the differences that we've marked as a result of this last period? By the way, it's been a very significant period for us in another sense as well, because during the course of this past year, we've actually lost a whole tranche of Jewish leadership. It's been a terrible time for all the greats. You consider the fact that Norman Lamb, of course, has not been a great influence in these past couple of decades, but was hugely, hugely influential in formulating the kind of orthodoxy that we all of us ascribe to in the main. And then, of course, the loss of Rabbi Din Steinsaltz, who's been a powerful voice in our generations. Nachum Rabinovich, who was Rabbi Sachs's teacher, as a great halachic authority, of course, Jonathan Sachs, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and all those people who directed the kind of orthodoxy that we subscribe to, who spoke to us, who really were able to talk to our generation, are no longer there. And quite apart from anything else, as we come out of COVID, the question is going to be, where do we turn to for leadership? Who offers us the moral direction in the world now? Rabbi Twersky, another powerful voice, passed away. So that's a question that bothers me enormously. because these were people that I looked up to and I took a cue from in many respects. But I don't know who to turn to now.
Yeah.
Who do you turn to?
I think, yeah. I'm interested in periods, actually. Like, we talked about even till now, we're still what people call, the post-Shoah period, or Jews rebuilding in the state of Israel and so on. And I think that has gone on for so long that we're entering a new era. And I think the COVID will be a way of being a lie between that. And some of the leaders you're talking about will be part of that. And I think the changes in the way community works and leadership works means overall, I mean, in the Haredi world, you've always had Gedolei Hador, but in modern Orthodoxy, in centuries as you described, we had what we called kind of these Gedolim who are kind of recognized across the board. I don't think we're going to have so much of that now. I think our communities are differentiating at a much faster pace. I think internet access and global access to knowledge from around the world means that the idea of holding together a group under one specific leader is going to change. And there's going to be lots and lots of rabbis and women educators and leaders who are going to be leading in multiple different kinds of ways. So for me, it's not about the big people to turn to. It's going to be lots of different directions and pathways, which for some people, it scares them because local authority will, I think, be diminished. But for me, I find it a very exciting time with lots of different, traditional, hopefully, alternatives coming out. What do you think about that?
The problem with a smorgasbord is that everything on the table is delicious, but you can't eat it all. You have to make your choices about what you're going to eat. And if we're left, if we're left in a state now where you can simply choose the flavor and the style of Judaism that suits you, it seems to me that there's something of an inversion from the way in which the top-down Judaism was supposed to work. It was never supposed to be just about Kiblu, we were supposed to simply accept, as we say in the Megillah, the Jews accepted. And it was never intended to be a process in which you simply choose the kind of Judaism that makes sense to me. I like what this person says, and it seems to be within the bounds of orthodoxy. So that is the kind of choice I make. Of course, we've been doing that in any event by virtue of the kinds of synagogues that we've chosen to belong to, the kinds of the styles of Judaism we've chosen to. But you're talking about a much, much greater fragmentation. And when you have fragmentation, the coherence of orthodoxy, what we call in the broadest sense orthodoxy, the lines that define us. I mean, I'm never quite sure where orthodoxy these days ends and Masorti begins. The lines have become very, very blurred. And the tug is always to the left, to permit more and more. So at what point do we find that we have changed so much that it's unrecognizable? It's no longer the authentic orthodoxy. And
Well, I mean, I get what you're saying, but if we were really in that situation, then I'd say that's a question. But for me, rabbis, definitely in the United Synagogue, have been molding their shuls around who's really coming for years. They've already adapted. So instead of this question of people finding the rabbi that fits with them, it's the rabbi, adapting to their community. That's already gone on to such a great extent. And for me, the issue about coherence or control is at the expense of creativity and personal approaches. So in the need to get everybody to come together, we keep people, and I'm only saying this because it's you, Shlomo, right? So you understand what I mean. We keep people partly ignorant. Right? So if people really knew what the Megillah said and all the different readings of it and the feminist readings and the halakhic readings and the political readings of it, they would ask much more challenging questions about it, and it would be much more interesting debate and different angles and approaches. But by keeping everybody together and keeping it light and doing a party around it, not really getting to the specifics too much, we keep everybody together. But there's a sacrifice we make for that, keeping everybody under one roof, Shlomo. And I think we might have got a bit too far on that, because if you lose individual commitment or personal connection, that's where, in other words, what you're saying about people needing to ascribe to commit to something beyond them and not just choosing it, that has to come, though, commandedness, ironically, Shlomo, comes from my choice to feel commanded, right? And to get that, I need to be educated. I need to be knowledgeable, and we've taken that away, especially from the United Synagogue, in a big way, in my personal way.
Well, let me touch on that, but first of all, let me just say your idea that we have to mold ourselves to community reminded me, as you were saying, of the story of the man who comes to his rabbi, his Orthodox rabbi, and he says to him, Rabbi, he said, my cat died. And the rabbi said, I'm very sorry to hear it. He said, actually, he said, I'd like him to be buried in the Orthodox cemetery. The rabbi says to him, you've got to be kidding. Are you out of your mind? So we've gone so far that your cat now needs to be buried next to your parents? He said, that's absolutely outrageous. He said, get the heck out of here. And I said, all right. He said, don't get so excited. He says, look, he said, I was going to donate £1 million to the synagogue, but I'll give it to Reform down the road. And the rabbi says, come back. He says, why didn't you tell me that your cat's Jewish? It is absolutely true that we mold ourselves to a certain extent to the communities of which we are part. As much as we try to influence our congregation influences us. There's no question that rabbis and rebbitzins and rabbinic families change as a result of the community in which they find themselves. And I tell you, there have been occasions when I've wondered to myself whether I'm just a nice Orthodox boy who's a rabbi of a conservative community. Because in a community where, a large number of the people are not Shomer Shabbat, where a very small minority would be observant to the level of what we would term in the broadest term Shmirat Shabbat, you're talking to a very broad group of people. But in a sense, Rafi, that has actually been the great strength of this institution, the unique strength of this institution called the United Synagogue, which doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. In Israel, religion is hugely polarized. You're in or you're out. In America, it's polarized. I always say, as a way of example, that somebody who comes from a centrist Orthodox community, say a South African, has been brought up in the equivalent of the United Synagogue, who emigrates to England, is likely to join a United Synagogue. The same person who goes to America will join a conservative or reform synagogue because they will not find the equivalent of the kind of broad church, if you pardon the expression, broad church orthodoxy that the United Synagogue has been able to promote. The fact that it's able to be there as a place where, I was once asked by somebody who, a Meshulach, a collector from Israel, that came and got into a conversation with him. He wanted to know all about, my community. He said to me, how many young men, have you sent to yeshiva? I said, I think there might have been one in 1963. I don't remember exactly the date. He said, oh, she must have sent lots of young ladies to seminary. I said, yes, I think there was one, but I've sort of forgotten her name. He was absolutely shocked. He said, well, what have you done here? I said, well, they're still Jewish. And, it sounded like totally defeatist. But I said to him, if you want to know what we've achieved in shuls like mine, it is that the most religious and the least religious Jews can sit comfortably next to each other in the same synagogue. Show me anywhere else in the world where that can happen.
Shlomo, and I really value that. I really value that.
When you start to fragment that and you turn it into everyone in its own little atomized little space with its own set of rules and laws and heterim, and this is permitted and that permitted, you have lost this center ground that has held Anglo Jewry together, and that is our greatest virtue.
Yep.
So I'm not entirely, I know that in America has spawned a huge number of creative and energetic new kinds of formats for Judaism. I hear what you say, Rafi, and I hear that you're excited by it. But I fear for it as well.
No, I think what I'm describing can be done within the United Synagogue. But I think what happens is there's a nervousness about creativity and playfulness. In other words, it's a great virtue having all different kinds together, but it can be a hindrance since that we try and keep everybody happy at the same time. And that stymies creativity. That's what worries me. I'll give you a story for me. This is 15 years ago now, Bushy Synagogue, when I was speaking on the alternative service they did there, and the alternative service finished just before they put the child back in the ark. So I went back into the shul, and the rabbi leaned over to me, and he said, "We're just putting the child back in the ark," and he goes, "Do you want to give the sermon?" Right. So they're singing A's, Chaim He. So I think, okay, so I didn't have time to be nervous, Shlomo. And I got up there and I was just, I just talked in a very different kind of way because I'm kind of prepared in that kind of way. And a guy comes up to me in Kiddush afterwards and he said, "Rabbi, that was great." And he takes out his wallet and he takes out a piece of paper from his wallet and a pen and he goes, "I've got to talk to you about this. What's your phone number?" Right? No shame, no embarrassment, no assumption if you shouldn't do this. Right? So I smiled and I said, "Oh, you're going to try and make me write on Shabbos. I can't do that. But if you promise to memorize my number, I'll tell it to you." But the point I'm making is that was 15 years ago in a shul like that. So where our community really is, Shlomo, the truth of it, in United Synagogues, members, what percentage of your community can read Hebrew? What percentage of your community can translate Hebrew? I know what's going on, and you do at United Synagogues. That is a situation of, so we keep people together with a happiness and a warmth, but it won't be enough. It's too thin, Shlomo, for the next generation. I think it's a value. I would never get rid of it, but you also need serious creativity and options within the synagogue framework, right? Within that structure in order for survival. Because I look at the numbers of where things are going and people joining United Synagogue, and it's not, the positive that you talk about is not enough, because I think, as I mentioned earlier, we're moving into a new era of personal identity, big time. Right, and now people can be cynical about it, about the gender identity and sexual identity and ideological identities. But this is a new era that is just bubbling now, and it's coming huge. And if we can't relate to people in that way, the next generation, they're not going to be around. My experience more and more talking to teenagers and people in their 20s is that. I don't know about you, but that's my thoughts.
Yes, you're touching on some really important issues over here, and it's absolutely true. We have a little morning group that Edward knows about after our regular service. I do key extracts. It's just the Ashri and Shema and Amida, etc., and a little bit of a chat, etc. And it is quite true that the people who have joined that and come every single morning, and women participate in reading the prayers, etc., that the majority of people in that group can do no more than read the first paragraph of the Shema. Beyond that, their literacy is, and I'm not saying Lashon Hara about it, they'll be the first to imagine. So there's enormous, huge ignorance in. And Judaism, in one sense, can't be sustained through ignorance. But on the other hand, these are all people who come because they are searching for something that's going to touch them deeply. They want to be touched, they want to be inspired, and despite their ignorance, they want to connect. And if you are a truly effective leader in a congregation that consists of the broadest spectrum of people, from the most learned who can open up a piece of Talmud and rattle it off with a Tosafot and a riff and a run, to those who can't even read Hebrew, you have to be able to find a way to touch each one of their souls in some special way. You have to be able to speak to every single one of them. Now, the most successful rabbis and rebbitzins are the ones who are able to do that, and no surprise, their communities are growing in terms of numbers. It is true that the community is aging, that the young people are not by and large flocking. The children of these members are not finding their way into our synagogues, and neither are they finding their way in very great numbers into the Shtibelach and the Baal Teshuvah and the Kiruv kinds of places. So they're kind of like falling off the edge because they're living in a different world. And all the issues, that you've mentioned, I'm waiting for the time when a young person who's had a gender change, reassignment, comes to me and says, I was a girl, but now I want a bar mitzvah. And I've got no idea how we're going to handle that. And once again, the dearth of the kind of leadership who understands our generation is the one that we have lost. And if you're going to go to any of the Gedolim, you're not going to hear an answer that's going to fit for our kinds of communities. You're just going to hear no. And as the Gemara says, koach behetera gifa. The power to be able to say yes is much greater than it's easy to say no, but to be able to say yes, that requires enormous breadth and learning. So I don't deny for a moment, Rafi, that we face some very, very large challenges. But can I come back so that we don't lose the time entirely to the issues of what happens post-COVID? And I think for me, one significant change that has come about, everybody has spoken about how we've learned a new sense of connectedness, of feeling, of looking at, caring for each other. And, I hope that all of that will continue. But to a certain extent, actually, that's always been there in our communities. It's one of the things which defines all of our communities, that there is that level of caring. I think there's one other major shift which has happened. Let me put it in a slightly rabbinic way. We're commanded to create a mishkan in these parashiot, because that's the place where the Shekhinah is going to dwell. We have to create a space where God is going to be tangibly, manifestly present in our lives. And we create this space called a mishkan. The mishkan morphs into a temple. The first temple is more successful than the second temple, but nevertheless, even the second temple is that focal point. The second temple is then destroyed, and the genius of Judaism finds a new home for the Shekhinah, and that is called the Mikdash Ma'at. It's the synagogue. It's the place where we collect together, we create community, where we mimic many of the practices of the temple, and it's a place where we try to find that special connectedness with God. And for the past year, we've lost that as well.
Yeah.
So where's the Shekhinah gone? Where's been the new place for the Shekhinah? And I think certainly for me, for whom Shabbat has suddenly become a wonderful day, without shul, without community, without duties, the Shekhinah should have been now brought into our homes. We should have found in this COVID period a new way of actually relating to God in the context of our homes and our families. Even if you're living alone, or if you're just now an empty nester, a husband and a wife, the time that we've spent together, the forced time we've spent together, the balance that we've had to find in terms of delineating what is work and what is relaxation and play, when you don't have the natural delineation of moving out of the house to go to a place of work and to come back in the evening. The balance that one has had to find to hold your cool when you're trying to do your work and your kids are on the same Zoom doing their homework, etc., and somebody's making a noise in the house, the tensions. We've seen, I probably saw in last week's Jewish Chronicle, that the incident of domestic abuse in the Jewish community has absolutely escalated during this period of time, because people have not learned how to get on each other, how to bring the divine presence into our home. And I think that has been one of the greatest, I'm grateful for this incredible opportunity. I'm sad in many respects to lose it now as we go out of lockdown. And I just wonder now, my real question, Rafi, is whether we will take those things we've learned about family and about relationships and the way in which we manage them and sustain them when we go back into the hurly-burly of everyday life. That's when we ask, what will Judaism look like after COVID? That, for me, is a much more important question than whether we're going to have our kiddushes buffet style, silver plate, a silver platter, or digging with our hands. What's changed in the quality of our relationship with the Almighty?
Yeah, I agree with you very much. And for me, And you talk about the double-edged sword of, increased abuse, and at the same time celebrating being together and being at home. For me, Jewish growth at home only works again if people are empowered, knowledgeable about these things in exactly the same kind of way. I mean, Judaism always had that balance between the two. The big events are Friday night at home, Seder at home, Sukkah at home.
Yes.
And the United Synagogue and community started taking it away and bringing everything into the synagogue, which wasn't always the thing. When I was growing up, there wasn't Kiddush every week. Kiddush was part of home.
Yes, Rafi, you and I both simultaneously, but in different ways, started the process of trying to change that at Pesach time. At Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur time, when we each produced in very different styles and formats, something for people to be able to do in their home and to begin to educate them. And this is the point that I'm really getting at. You see, when you talk,
exactly.
when you talk about literacy and people studying, there's a certain kind of reality here that we have to face. If I interview a famous television personality, either in person in the synagogue, in a shul, or even on Zoom, I will have up to 450, 500 connections, which probably means 1,000 people. If I give a Gemara shiur to the community, I'll have 10 or 15 people, if I'm lucky, who will turn up. The more intense Jewish learning is, the less people turn up. So if we're looking at our synagogues as the locus for the teaching of Judaism, we might be looking in the wrong place. Perhaps now, when I talk about the role of home, the efforts that you and I and others began when the penny dropped at Rosh Hashanah, that people are going to be sitting at home, not in shul, have got no clue which end of the machzor to open, don't know how to access these prayers, don't know how to begin to connect with the Almighty in the themes of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, that we now need, actually, as Jonathan Rabbi Sachs did so successfully with some of his programs, and as someone like Foreman is doing with his cartoons each week, the thrust now is to actually get into people's homes and to educate them there in situ with their families.
But Shlomo, I want to go further.
What is changing?
I agree, Shlomo, but I wouldn't use the word education. I would use the word, which is even more scary, which is empowerment. So it's not, I'm going to teach you about Seder. I'm going to say, here's different ways you might want to do your Seder, and you choose what you want to do. And that involves educating yourself as a process, but the empowerment, which again is taking away from the control. In the synagogue, you control the order of the service, the level of the laning, who gets to do what. At home, you have no power. And for rabbis like us, that's scary in a way. But if we want to empower people to make it meaningful for themselves, we have to let go of that issue and empower people to do this kind of thing. So an example was the Megillah reading just now, So, are we going to let people do it on Zoom and give them different ways of doing it, or say, well, really the best is to come to synagogue, but if you can't, then do it like that, which played it down. That was still, that for me was a feeling of the discomfort the authorities have with, we're going to empower people to do it, in their different ways, opposed to we're going to hold it here. And that for me is an interesting thing, because I do believe in central authority and structure and doing it properly. I agree.
Yes.
But for me as an educator, you have to empower people to grow first.
Absolutely.
That's more important.
If you go to a football match, you are a spectator, but you get a huge amount out of it. You really enjoy it. Either you bellyache or you cheer, etc. Every time your team scores, you jump up and you scream. There's a certain sense in which attending synagogue for many of our members who can't daven, who can't read all the words, is a spectator sport as well. They'd love the atmosphere, they love the singing, they love the tunes, they love the chavurah, they love the little, chat with the person next to them, the whole atmosphere. I don't know whether they love the sermons. I'd like to think that they tolerate them, but it's the whole package. But it is, as you're suggesting, a spectator sport, because they never learn, they never change. They're just participating in something that somebody else runs for them, better or worse. And I agree with you entirely.
Right.
And that's what has
And
to
they
change.
become observant, and they become observant as opposed to participating Jews.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
but it
observance,
can't
not
change.
participation.
It can't change very easily in the format of our synagogue service. That's the point. And therefore,
So let's change it. So let's change
have to
it.
change its locus. It's hard to change synagogue service. I'm telling you that. I'm so thrilled.
I know.
I'm so thrilled with this little group that we run, the 20 people who joined me, after the synagogue service, because for the first time, I can do the things with this little group of people, including having children davening and women reading and doing things and talking and stopping and interrupting and asking questions, all the things that I always ever wanted to do in running a synagogue service. And had I done them in the midst of a synagogue service, I would have been branded reform. But now on Zoom, suddenly I can do it all and I'm not reform. So the point I'm making, having been around for probably much too long, is it's very hard to change a synagogue service. So therefore we have to find other ways to do it. And I'm suggesting, as you are, I think we're in agreement with this, we need to find new ways to touch people in their homes. By the way, it's not an either or. And I don't know if people are going to come back to shul. I really don't.
Well, I think. I mean, I heard one
hate
rabbi.
the thought of going back to shul. I hate it.
Yeah.
I hope it's not being recorded.
But Shlomo, I heard one rabbi saying, "Oh, well, we'll do a few Karlabach minyanim. We'll do that. We'll get people to come back in." And I think he's completely out of touch with where things are. You're not, because you're honest and you ask questions and you listen. But we have to know where people really are and go to them where they are.
Yeah.
I think I'm conscious of time, so I want to give opportunity for people to ask you. Harangue you, because I know you love that. So whoever would like to harangue Shlomo, please unmute and harangue away. If anyone's got any questions?
We've flummoxed them.
All good? There's some people write sometimes. I seem to remember a Karlabach service up in New York City. Yes, there are Karlabach minyanim and those things, but it's more than that. Questions people want to ask? Yes, Clive.
Clive, unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hello, Clive. How are you?
I am very well, thank you. Thank you very much. It's lovely to see you. I just wanted to, I wanted to test your pessimism. The Norris Lee I've seen over the last 30 years has changed phenomenally in relation to much larger numbers of children going to Jewish day schools, significant number of people going to yeshiva and SEM before university, but particularly one phenomenon, which is getting about 80 people to Hashkoma on Shabbos morning. Now, I've done a straw poll about this, an opinion poll, and I've established that 50% of the people there do not know what it means to say Kriyas Shema at its appointed time. And the other 50% don't care. They know, but they don't care when you say it. But they come at 7:45, and they're there for 2.5 hours, and they love it. Now, that just didn't exist 30 or 40 years ago. So this centrist orthodoxy does contain some of the more pessimistic phenomena that you speak about. But at the same time, there is, of the dwindled community, those who remain seem to be in a stronger place than we were 30 or 40 years ago. Does any of that resonate with you?
Norris Lee is an exception because of the demographics of the Hampstead Garden suburb area in which we live, in which there are a core of people who are committed. As many as those who will gravitate more towards the right, many more fall off on the other side of the left. And for me, the struggle in places like South Hampstead is not just to promote those who want to move further to the right, but to encourage and to draw in those who are tempted to move to the left. And one of the problems that you find, Clive, when shuls become too orthodox and move too much to the right, is that they alienate those who feel they can no longer walk into this place and feel comfortable because it's no longer their kind of place. So you have to be able to create other kinds of formats. And I can tell you that South Hampstead and Norris Lee, and it's one of the strengths of the United Synagogue. I'll put it another way. We're a mile away from a very large United Synagogue called St. John's Wood. You could not find two communities more different one from the other. And Norris Lee and South Hampstead are very, very different kinds of communities because we are talking to a very, very different demographic. By and large, the people who choose to live in Hampstead Garden suburb, the young couples, will do so not just because they are nice gardens and a bit of space and houses and things, but because they have a Jewish identity for them and for their children that they want to promote and they want to encourage. Very often, the people who choose to live in metropolitan London, places like South Hampstead, Chalk Farm, or Hampstead, etc., are making a decision to leave suburbia. They are looking for something as an alternative to suburbia. They're looking for more freedom. They're looking for something which is more metropolitan. They're looking for something which is more multicultural. They feel stifled in what they see as identikit suburbia. They have unchosen suburbia, and therefore you're dealing with a very, very different kind of demographic. And the sorts of language you have to speak to them, the sorts of activities that you have to engage with them, etc. Despite the fact that at the same time, you want to grow that core who are more interested and who want to be more observant and who want to study and have one thing for their children. Those are the challenges that communities outside of Norris Lee face. But by the way, I'm not pessimistic. And the reason why I'm not pessimistic is for one very simple reason. I know it sounds a bit like a cliche. My job is to look after Jews. It's the Almighty's job to look after Judaism. Judaism will flourish. There's a hot core, and Judaism will continue to flourish from that hot core. And some of that hot core are people like the ones in Norris Lee, but even more so the Haredi world, from which we feel slightly estranged and slightly critical. But they are the hot core. Judaism, I have no worries that Judaism will persist and flourish. It'll change, it'll continue to undergo change, etc. If I can make a difference to one single person's life and allow that person to feel more connected wherever they're coming from, however they present themselves, however irreligious they consider themselves to be, however ignorant they are, and if I can help to ignite that person's soul, to bring them closer to the Almighty and to make them feel more Jewish, then that's the task for today. And tomorrow will take care of itself.
I can see another question from Evelyn and Larry, if they want to ask.
Hi, this time it's Evelyn.
Oh.
It's a different kind of question for me, because I would have said before coronavirus, I would have said education, education, education. Coming as an American Jew here, I was always struck by the fact that often people felt like observers or spectators in shul because they hadn't learned to communicate in any way that brought them closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu when they were davening. Yeah, the davening was not working as a vehicle for them to get anywhere. And I felt that distance very acutely when I was bereaved. And then again, when coronavirus hit. And quite frankly, the only person in the world that I could connect to at the time, aside from family, was the late Rabbi Sachs. And in some of his brief correspondence, he did something every, I think, 15, 20 minutes every week. He managed to keep me connected in a way that nothing in Judaism ever did. up until that point. And what I'd like to see carried forward is that unique ability to actually talk to people where they are. Perhaps you have it, forgive me, I've been in a different community, but I think the structure of United Synagogue, the discussion on format, education, is so formal that it misses what's really important, what I've learned during this period, that you have to find people in their soul and what they need, and find what it is in Judaism that can help them and bring them forward. And I think there are too few people, at least the ones that I'm seeing, and the people, I include some of the people who are teaching now, some of the readings of the late Rabbi Sachs, are missing that unique insight into what it is people need at one particular moment and how to elevate them. And I'd like to see that carried forward.
Well, you see, you're saying everything that I've been saying. But Rabbi Sachs was unique, and I wish I could do it.
No, I very much agree. I think, Evelyn, what we find is that rabbis, the good ones, connect to their communities. They begin to understand them, and I think Shlomo does that in terms of beginning to try to speak to people where they are and to be honest and to not, stand on ceremony. But it is a challenge to do that, absolutely. And using these new technologies to reach out further is vital. People are finding different ways of doing that. Ben Tobin?
I think, by the way, one of the things that will change, I hope, as a result of COVID, in the post-COVID Judaism, is that Zoom won't go away. That we will continue to employ it in a hybrid format. By that I mean, I don't just mean that we should zoom in on services, because I'm not sure that that works. My sense is that Zooms need to be specific, standalone activities, not something where some people are watching somebody else doing something. But the value of Zoom, I mean, Norris Lee's had a very successful Kabbalat Shabbat service. We've had a hugely successful Kabbalat service every week. If I could say that the numbers of people who used to come to shul on a Friday night, were never more than 15 or 20. And quite happily, we have 80, 85 connections every Friday night for Kabbalat Shabbat. And, a little bit of singing, a sermonette, and etc. And it does the trick. Now, I'm a little bit afraid that if we continue with Kabbalat Shabbat, people will, South African Jews go to shul on Friday night and are always surprised, when they come here to England and discover that nobody comes to shul on Friday night, but they come to shul on Shabbat morning. And for them, that's really stupid, you see, because on Friday night, the service is nice and short. There's no boring Torah reading. It's very musical. It finishes all within the space of an hour. And on Shabbat morning, they can lie in bed without any conscience whatsoever, having felt they've already been to shul. So I'm a little bit concerned that if we have a successful Friday night Kabbalat Shabbat, people will take a view on Shabbat morning, well, I've heard the sermon, done what needs to be done. And so, but nevertheless, that's the kind of challenges we're going to find. Do we want to keep that sort of thing? Is it going to impact upon other parts of our offering? But we need to find the hybrid.
Ben, I saw you want to ask a question as well.
It's more a point than a question. In fact, the point that Rabbi Shlomo just made is what I was going to talk about. I preferred for a long time weekday morning minyanim for the same reason, because they're 40 minutes in and out. No one talks to me. I find the content much more relevant to what I want to think about than a Shabbat morning, and it's short. And I've been thinking about this in the last few weeks because we've agreed a new lease for the minyan for another 10 years with the church, which is great, and listeners are dealing with it. And I've been thinking to myself, hold on a minute, I'm a signatory to this. Will people want to come back to shul? And I said to Rich yesterday, I'll be your reserve if you don't have a minyan for Shabbat, I'll come. And he said to me, actually, we're 9 tomorrow. We need you to come. And I didn't want to go today. I thought, I haven't been to shul on Shabbat morning for a long time. It's going to be boring. There won't be singing. It won't be, didn't want to go, but I went and I really enjoyed it. I surprised myself. And what I really enjoyed was the contact with other people. And the fact that the people were there together, it wasn't on Zoom and it wasn't impersonal. And I think people will come back for that contact and the fact that they're doing something together with other people on a Shabbat morning. So after today, I'm reassured.
Right, okay. Yeah, because it's changing all the time. Exactly. There could be that. I think Larry wanted to add one point, and then I think we have to wrap up and stuff.
Yeah, just you mentioned technology, and I think, unfortunately, United Synagogue scored a terrible own goal. You may know that Norris Lee, for a while, allowed Zoom minyanim and people to be able to say Kaddish, and that filled a great need. And in fact, I started to go to Shacharit just to be able to respond to people's Kaddish. And then head office came out with the diktat banning that. And you know what happened? People went elsewhere. And I think that's terrible. The shul filled a spiritual need using technology, and then head office banned it. I don't expect any response to that. It's just a comment about the failure.
I actually will respond, just because sure Shlomo might as well, which is that, there's going to be some things they're going to say no to, some things they're going to say yes to. And also, as you said, like, people are going to go elsewhere, sometimes elsewhere within Orthodoxy, because, rabbis in other countries in Israel and so on allowing these things, and sometimes outside of Orthodoxy, which is a question. But I think that's going to happen more as the world opens up. I do believe in, the rabbis should be allowed to say no occasionally, but in terms of getting it right. So, for instance, this year, Seder night as well, the Zoom options, there are Orthodox rabbis in America and Israel who would allow that individually, but not in this community. It's always been a challenging issue. I don't know, Shlomo, you want to add anything to that?
Well, I wanted to be compliant. I did not want to go against rulings of the of the chief rabbi and the London Beth Din. And so I sought to find another way that would satisfy those members of my community who had been bereaved. And I spoke to them about Mishnah and explained from various sources what it is that Kaddish does in terms of Aliyat HaNeshama, assisting and helping the Shama to rise, and showed them that there were sources that said that Mishnah does exactly the same thing. And I asked them the question, now tell me, why do you want to say Kaddish? You want to say it because you feel good, or because you want to do something for the soul of the deceased person? If it is the latter, here's an alternative for you. So we instituted the recital every single day for those who are in place of saying Kaddish, Kol Yisrael Yesh Lehem Chelek L'Olam Haba, which speaks about the essential connection between every single Jewish person and the Almighty, and how every soul finds its place back with the Almighty, taken from Isaiah. And perhaps it's because we are a less religious community, I say in inverted commas, or less learned community, but it absolutely seems to have satisfied everybody who has, and by the way, I spent the Corona year bereaved. My mother passed away just before Corona in February. I said Kaddish, I think over the course of the year, I said Kaddish twice. It's a very bizarre situation because I have a brother in America, and my mother said to him before she passed away, he's not as religious as I am, as observant as I am. I think he's a very religious person. And she said to him, don't worry, he said, don't drive yourself mad to go to shul, twice a day, 3 times and everything else. Your brother will say Kaddish. Turns out that my less observant brother in America said Kaddish twice a day throughout the entire Corona period, and the Frum rabbi said Kaddish twice. But I wanted to lead the community by showing them that I am also just saying, well, okay, I learned a parak of Mishnah for every service, Shachrit, Mincha, Mariv, which was an obligation that I took on. I didn't expect that of the community, but I wanted to show them that if there is a no, you can find another way, and that has to be satisfying as well.
Shlomo, I really hear you, and it's valiant and it's meaningful and personal. What I found is that, because rabbis are educated and know alternative methods, learning Mishnah is meaningful for them, and it can be for some people. For others who have such a small connection that Kaddish is all they know, and it's a level of ignorance, let's be honest about this, that nothing else seems to satisfy. And it's interesting about how much people are willing to be makel or not and understanding. And I truly believe if some of the powers that be really knew what was really going on, they would have given different Pesach. And that's the shame for me. It's not about, they've got a right to say yes or no. I think there's a lack of sometimes of understanding of where things are. So for instance, I would like to see when a Pesach's coming out, that they would phone a number of rabbis, including you, and saying, where is your community? How would this come out? Where are we? And sometimes if our leaders, and again, and the mistake of my leadership, Shlomo, I always blame not on the leaders, but on the members of the United Synagogue or members of the community for choosing them, right? Which is that if there's a disconnection between the leaders and their members, it doesn't always work out. So for me, it's not about blaming an individual. It's about a structure which doesn't necessarily work in a holistic way. But we have to end. And look, Shlomo, the way you talk...
Rafi, remember the old gag, how many people does it take to change a light bulb for Dayan? The answer is none. Dayanim don't change.
Right, exactly. They can't as well. I agree. But Shlomo, and I'll say this, I'm not just doing shmooze. Ever since I went to your shul when Jacqueline and I were first married, you're one of the rabbis, and there's more and more, thank God, like you, which I'm very happy to say, who are like Aaron. They're with the community. They're on that side. And if things are going wrong, they'll be on the side of the community and hear and understand. You know, you don't dismiss when I challenge those questions. When I ask you about these things, you're aware. You admit when you don't know there's going to be answers, but you're trying to find a way through. And when we have leaders who are like that, there is hope definitely for Am Yisrael.
You've got to be kidding, Rafi. I have
you're
the
one of
same
the good
questions
guys.
as you. I asked the same questions.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's what I like. But look, it's an ongoing conversation. It's great always having you. And I found as well, more and more, the United Synagogue rabbis are approachable. You can disagree with them, you know, that they want to connect, you know, they live in between the powers that be and the people. And these are challenging things, but there's huge unknowns coming out. And look, one thing I'll say, you know, Rabbi Sachs always said, you know, turn a challenge, a crisis into an opportunity. So, you know, we want to do, like Ezra took when he came back to Israel as a resurging and a recommitment to our Judaism. I want to see post-recovery, and I'm going to get up and shout about it when the time comes. This is an opportunity for recommitting to our Judaism. It might be a very different Judaism, but opportunity to recommit. And I want to see that as a moment, not just as a continuation, but as a renaissance. But
yeah, Tov.
We'll do it together.
I look forward.
Thank you so much, Robert. Wonderful, everybody seeing you all. Do you want to tell us about? Thank you so much. And
lovely to see you next week. To see friends.
Yes, absolutely.
Indeed. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you,
Rabbi Shlomo, for and Rabbi Rafi for a really intriguing discussion. I noticed that a number of people joined after the beginning, and for those of you who missed the beginning and want to catch up, if you go to the Central Square Minyan website, the recording will be available by tomorrow morning, and I'm sure many people would like to watch some of this again. Next week, we have as our guest Dr. Leora Harvard, who spearheaded one of the large COVID vaccine centers, and she'll be talking about her experience and generally about COVID-related matters. So not quite so spiritual, but I hope it will be as interesting to everybody as it sounds to me that it's going to be. So we look forward to everybody joining us again, and we wish you all a good week.
Thank you so much.